Hey everybody, welcome back for another deep dive with us.
Hey everyone.
Today we're going to be looking at how to say no.
That's right.
And this is something that we all struggle with sometimes.
Oh, absolutely.
So we thought it'd be fun to just dig into it a little bit and, you know, see what we could find.
Yeah, just explore the nuances of saying no.
Yeah, and one of the things that really struck me as we were preparing for this was, recognizing that we don't always have to say yes.
Right, and that's a big one.
Like, it's okay to say no sometimes.
Oh, yeah. I mean, recognizing that you have the power to say no is huge.
Yeah, it's like sometimes you feel obligated.
Exactly.
That really you want to say no.
It's like you're not really obligated to say yes. Just because you can do something doesn't mean you should do it.
Exactly.
It's about prioritizing what's truly important to you.
Yeah, and sometimes, it's so easy to get caught up in the moment and you just say yes without even thinking about it.
Right. It's like we're on autopilot sometimes.
Yeah, and then later you're like,
Yeah.
oh, why did I agree to that?
Totally. And that can lead to feeling overwhelmed and stressed and even resentful.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's so important to be mindful of our commitments and make sure that we're only saying yes to things that we genuinely want to do.
So then how do we get out of that trap?
Well, a big part of it is setting boundaries.
Okay.
It's like drawing a line in the sand and saying, this is what I'm willing to do and this is what I'm not willing to do.
Yeah, and that can be hard sometimes.
It definitely can be, but it's so important for our well-being.
I think a lot of people are afraid to set boundaries because they don't want to hurt other people's feelings.
I understand that.
Or they're afraid of coming across as selfish.
Right, but the thing is, setting boundaries is not about being selfish. It's about taking care of yourself.
Right.
It's about protecting your time and energy so you can show up as your best self for the things and the people that truly matter.
Yeah, and, it's not always easy to set boundaries, especially with people we're close to,
That's true.
like family or friends. But it's important to remember that boundaries are healthy.
Absolutely.
They're a way of respecting ourselves and our limits.
And sometimes the people who are closest to us are the ones who need those boundaries the most,
That's a good point.
because they're the ones we're most likely to overextend ourselves for.
Yeah,
But it's important to remember that we can't pour from an empty cup.
right.
We need to take care of ourselves first so that we can be there for others in a healthy and sustainable way.
Yeah, and sometimes I think setting boundaries can actually strengthen relationships
I agree.
because it creates more clarity and respect.
Exactly. It's about communicating our needs and expectations in a clear and assertive way.
So how do we go about setting boundaries then? Like, what are some practical tips?
Well, one helpful tip is to start by identifying your non-negotiables.
Okay.
Like, what are the things that are absolutely essential for your well-being?
So, like, what are things that if you don't have, you're just not going to be a happy person?
Right, exactly.
Okay.
It could be things like getting enough sleep or exercise or spending time in nature.
Or even just having some quiet time to yourself.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Once you know what your non-negotiables are, you can start setting boundaries around them.
Okay.
So for example, if you know that you need at least 8 hours of sleep every night, you might set a boundary of not scheduling any evening activities that will keep you up past your bedtime.
That makes sense.
Or if you know that you need some time to yourself every day, you might set a boundary of not answering emails or phone calls during certain hours.
Yeah.
The key is to be clear and consistent with your boundaries.
Right.
Let people know what your limits are and don't be afraid to enforce them.
But I think sometimes it can be hard to know how to say no in a way that doesn't feel rude or confrontational,
I understand that.
especially if you're dealing with someone who's very persistent.
Right, but the good news is that there are ways to say no gracefully and effectively.
Okay. So tell me more about that.
Well, one approach is to simply acknowledge the request and express gratitude before politely declining. For example, you might say something like, "Thank you so much for thinking of me for this project. I really appreciate the offer, but unfortunately, I'm not able to take on anything new right now."
That's a good one.
Yeah, it's simple and straightforward, but it gets the message across.
Yeah. And it doesn't make you sound like a jerk.
Exactly.
Okay.
Another helpful tip is to be brief and direct.
Okay.
You don't need to give a long explanation or make excuses.
Right.
Just state your no clearly and confidently.
Okay.
And if the person keeps pushing you, can simply repeat your no.
So you're saying, like, just keep saying no, 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 no.
Well, not necessarily no, but you can rephrase your no in different ways.
Okay.
Like you might say, "I understand that you're disappointed, but my decision is final."
Right.
Or, "I'm not able to do that, but I wish you all the best."
Okay.
The key is to remain calm and assertive.
and not get sucked into an argument.
Exactly.
Right.
And sometimes it can be helpful to offer an alternative solution if possible.
Yep.
Instead of just saying no outright, you might suggest someone else who might be a better fit for the task or offer to help in a different way.
That's a really good idea.
Yeah, it's a way to be helpful without overcommitting yourself.
Yeah, and it shows that you're still willing to support the person, even if you can't do exactly what they're asking.
Exactly.
Okay.
So those are just a few tips for setting boundaries and saying no gracefully.
But I'm sure there's a lot more to it than that.
Oh, absolutely.
So we're going to continue our deep dive into this topic in the next episode.
Sounds good.
But for now, I think we've given our listeners plenty to think about.
Definitely.
I'll see you next time.
See you then. And sometimes setting boundaries, even though it's good for us, brings up feelings of guilt.
Oh, the guilt monster. Yeah, I know all about that one.
It's like this little voice in our head that starts saying, oh, maybe I shouldn't have said no, or maybe I should have just said yes.
Yeah, and you start to question yourself and think like, am I being selfish?
Exactly. And that's where it's so important to remember that taking care of ourselves isn't selfish, it's actually essential.
Right. Because if we're constantly putting everyone else's needs before our own, we're going to end up burnt out and resentful.
Exactly. And that's not good for anyone.
So how do we overcome that guilt?
Yeah.
How do we kind of quiet that voice in our head that's telling us we're being selfish?
Well, I think a big part of it is recognizing where that guilt is coming from.
Okay.
Is it coming from a place of genuine concern for the other person, or is it coming from a fear of judgment or a need to please?
So it's like checking in with ourselves and being honest about our motivations.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And if we realize that the guilt is coming from a place of fear or insecurity, then we can start to challenge those thoughts.
So we can kind of reframe it and say okay, I'm not saying no because I'm a bad person. I'm saying no because I need to take care of myself.
Exactly. And sometimes that guilt we feel after saying no can actually be a sign that we've made the right decision. It can be an indication that we've honored our true feelings and set a boundary that protects our well-being.
That's interesting. I never thought about it that way.
Yeah, it's like our intuition is telling us that we need to prioritize ourselves.
So how do we learn to trust that intuition? How do we know when that guilt is a healthy sign versus when it's something that we need to kind of push through?
Well, I think it's a matter of practice.
Okay.
The more we set boundaries and say no, the more we start to develop that inner knowing.
Okay.
And over time, it becomes easier to distinguish between the guilt that's coming from a place of fear and the guilt that's coming from a place of self-respect.
So it's like building a muscle.
Exactly.
The more we use it, the stronger it gets.
Right. And the more confident we become in our ability to say no.
But, even when we know we need to say no, it can still be hard to actually do it, especially when we're worried about how the other person is going to react.
I understand that it's natural to want to avoid conflict or disappointment.
All right, and especially if it's someone we care about, we don't want to hurt their feelings.
I get it. But the thing is, sometimes saying yes when we really want to say no can actually damage the relationship in the long run.
How so?
Well, it can lead to resentment and frustration on our part.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And it can also create a dynamic where the other person starts to expect us to always say yes, which can be really draining.
Right, so it's actually more respectful in the long run to be honest about our feelings and set those boundaries.
Exactly. And, there are ways to say no without being harsh or confrontational.
Okay, I'm all ears. Tell me more about that.
Well, one approach is to simply acknowledge the request and express gratitude before politely declining.
Okay.
For example, you might say something like, "Thank you so much for thinking of me for this project. I really appreciate the offer, but unfortunately, I'm not able to take on anything new right now."
That's a good one. It's like you're acknowledging their request and validating their feelings, but you're also being firm about your decision.
Exactly. And, another helpful tip is to offer an alternative solution if possible.
Oh, okay. So instead of just saying no, you could say, I can't do that, but maybe I could.
Right. Exactly.
Okay, I like that.
It's a way to be helpful without overcommitting yourself.
Yeah, and it shows that you're still willing to support the person, even if you can't do exactly what they're asking.
Precisely. And sometimes simply asking for time to consider the request before giving a definitive answer can be helpful.
Okay, so let me think about it and get back to you.
Exactly. It gives you a chance to step back and assess your priorities and make sure that you're not saying yes out of obligation.
That's a really good point.
Yeah.
I think I'm guilty of saying yes too quickly sometimes.
It happens to the best of us.
So what are some of the benefits of saying no?
Yeah.
Besides just avoiding burnout and resentment?
Well, saying no can actually create space for new opportunities.
Really?
When we clear our plates of obligations that don't truly resonate with us, we open up space for new possibilities to emerge.
So it's like decluttering our schedule in our minds.
Exactly. And you know what's fascinating is that these new opportunities often emerge from unexpected sources.
Oh, tell me more about that. I'm intrigued.
Yeah, it might be a chance encounter or a rekindled connection or even a sudden burst of inspiration that leads us down a new path.
It's like we make room for the things that are meant to be.
Exactly. And you know, the beauty of saying no is that it allows us to step into that unknown with more intention and clarity.
Right, because we're not bogged down by all those other commitments.
Exactly. When we're not weighed down by obligations that don't serve us, we have the freedom to explore new possibilities with a sense of excitement and curiosity.
So it's not just about like clearing our schedule, it's also about clearing our mental space.
Precisely. It's about creating a life that feels expansive and fulfilling rather than constricted and overwhelming.
I love that. And I think a lot of people are afraid to say no because they're afraid of missing out.
Oh, I hear that a lot.
Like they think if they say no to this one thing, then they're going to miss out on some amazing opportunity.
Yeah, but the thing is when we say yes to everything, we're actually spreading ourselves too thin.
Right, we're not giving our full attention to anything.
Exactly, and that can actually prevent us from seeing the opportunities that are right in front of us.
So it's like by saying no to some things, we're actually opening ourselves up to other possibilities.
Precisely, and you know what's really cool is that this process of saying no and embracing new opportunities can actually lead to a profound shift in our self-perception.
Okay, now I'm really intrigued. Tell me more about that.
Well, when we start setting boundaries and prioritizing our own needs, we're essentially sending ourselves a powerful message.
Yeah.
We're saying that our time and energy are valuable and that we deserve to be treated with respect.
Right.
And as we begin to experience the positive effects of these choices, our confidence grows and we start to see ourselves in a new light.
It's like we're finally putting ourselves first.
Exactly. And that can be incredibly empowering.
Yeah, because for so long we've been taught to put everyone else's needs before our own.
Right. But the truth is, we can't be truly helpful to others if we're not taking care of ourselves first.
Yeah, and sometimes saying no is the most loving thing we can do for ourselves and for the people around us.
Absolutely. And you know, this newfound sense of self-worth can ripple outwards, influencing not only our personal lives, but also our professional pursuits and our relationships with others.
Wow, so it's like a chain reaction.
Exactly. And it all starts with that simple two-letter word, no.
Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground today,
We have.
but the conversation doesn't end here.
Definitely not.
I'd love for our listeners to kind of continue thinking about this and maybe even trying out some of these tips in their own lives.
Yeah, like what are some areas where you feel like you could benefit from setting stronger boundaries?
Or maybe what are some things that you've been saying yes to that you really want to say no to?
Exactly. And remember, it's okay to start small.
Right. It doesn't have to be some big dramatic change.
Just one small step at a time.
And over time, you'll find that it gets easier and easier to say no.
And more rewarding, too.
Yeah, because you'll be living a life that's more aligned with your true self.
Absolutely.
So until next time, keep exploring the power of no.
And remember, you deserve to create a life that feels good to you.
Thanks for joining us.
See you later.